You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi everyone, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This week's episode is about entrepreneurship and personal development, and it comes from an interview that I did recently on a podcast called Valiant Growth. In the discussion, we start off by talking a little bit about my background and how I got into entrepreneurship, and then we really focus on how important entrepreneurship is for personal development. I see entrepreneurship as being an amazing opportunity for personal development, and I think this is a really interesting topic, so I hope you enjoy the discussion. So without further delay, here's the interview.
Hi Jake, and welcome to Valiant Growth.
Hi Philip, thanks for having me.
I brought you on today to talk about entrepreneurship, and you have a rich history with that. And I don't know if you're doing it presently, but if some of my listeners know you, and I know that they know you, but some of them don't. So if you could go a little bit into your background and why you are an authority on the subject, that would be great.
Sure. My experience with entrepreneurship is from starting my own business. I spent a lot of time after university doing various things. I did a lot of postgraduate research and did a PhD. And after that, I started my own business. And my field was pedestrian movement consulting. My business was a consultancy that advised on how to design better shopping centers and street networks. And we advised developers and on how to build in order to get the right amount of foot traffic to support their development. So that was what my business did. And I set that up in 2000. I didn't know very much about business at all at the time, and I made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot through the process. Really enjoyed the process, found it incredibly fulfilling. And I made an effort to consciously learn as much as I could through setting up that business and growing it. So once I got to a point where we were profitable and successful, we managed to sell the business to a large multinational engineering company. And I chose to essentially take early retirement once I'd sold that business and do whatever I like with my time, which is what I've been doing since. We sold the business in 2007. I stayed on for 3 years to help integrate the business until 2010. And since then, I've had the opportunity to really pursue whatever I feel like doing. And one of the things that I have chosen to do is write about entrepreneurship and try and distill some of those things that I learned in the process of setting up and running that business. And that's what led me to write the book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, and what led me to look at also what kind of principles could I draw from all the things that I read from other entrepreneurs and things that worked for me, and try and distill them really partly for myself to get it written down, the things that I'd learned, but also hopefully to help other people who are interested in pursuing entrepreneurship too.
Who is the book for? What level of knowledge would you say it aims at?
Well, I tried to make sure that the book was as jargon-free as possible so that it could be for anyone interested in entrepreneurship from the very beginner level. But I haven't left things out that I found useful that would also benefit people who have experience in entrepreneurship. So I think it's for anyone at the beginner level interested in entrepreneurship, but also for entrepreneurs who want to get more fulfillment and have more fun in the process and want a more principled approach. But I tried to make sure that it was a book that was very much open to beginners.
Right, and that's great. And I can second that, both of them. It has both an introduction and also some advanced concepts. By the way, I was always wondering, whenever I hear your story, how did you get into pedestrian movement? It seems such an arcane field.
Well, initially, when I was an undergraduate, I was looking for interesting things to do during the summer at university, and I found the opportunity to go to Berlin, and this is just after reunification. And I got really interested in Berlin. It was an amazing place, and I went and lived there. And I wanted to continue studying, and I thought that Berlin was really interesting. So I got involved in property market economics. I actually did a master's in property development economics because Berlin was an amazing place where the property market was in total transition. And I went and worked there as a property market analyst for a while. And that was, I got involved in urban questions and issues to do with cities and urban development. And my father's an architect, so I had a background in that area anyway. I knew a bit about urban development just from my family. But I got involved in property market economics, and I was interested in analyzing Berlin and analyzing this change. And one of the tools that I found to help analyze changes to property markets was some computer modeling and computer simulation tools that analyze street networks. And to cut a long story short, one of the applications of this kind of tool is in predicting pedestrian modeling. So when I wanted to do a PhD, I was interested in pursuing this kind of computer simulation and modeling. And one of the main applications of that simulation is actually in predicting pedestrian flows. And as I was doing my PhD, I had the opportunity to do some consultancy work from the university itself, advising on pedestrian movement using these kind of tools. And I just saw a real opportunity to start a business in this field, because it was a field where there was a lot of demand, but there wasn't actually that many people doing things. And since then, it's actually become a lot more established. There are many different types of tools for pedestrian flow simulation and modeling now. But when I started my business, there was very little available. So I just saw an opportunity.
So were you an employee as well before you started your business, or was it kind of this consulting thing from the very beginning?
Yeah, I was an employee for a while in Berlin when I was working in the property market as a property market analyst. And then while I was doing my PhD, I was kind of freelancing and doing consultancy work from this consultancy unit within the university. But I've never really had long periods of being an employee. I've had quite a varied work history, but I've never spent that much time being an employee. And that's partly why I wrote a book about being job-free, because most of my life I have been job-free. And I've done lots of things, but I've never really spent a lot of time as an employee.
So both your life experience and the fact that you wrote, 2 books on the subject shows that you really value entrepreneurship and having job freedom. What's your pitch for being an entrepreneur?
Well, my interest was always in entrepreneurship as an opportunity to find maximum freedom and fulfillment and to really do what you want to do. It's the personal freedom aspect that was most interesting to me. And it's beyond the opportunity to do whatever, to follow your own path every day in building the business that you think makes sense and taking responsibility for that risk as well. There's also the opportunity to gain financial freedom through it. And that was always exciting to me as well, as a really valuable goal to pursue. But my interest in entrepreneurship has always been that aspect of personal freedom. I think in terms of freedom that's achievable in your own life, entrepreneurship is an incredible opportunity to live as freely as possible. And it's also something that I think gives you the opportunity for a huge amount of personal growth and personal development, because it really does require you to take responsibility for your actions in a far more fundamental level than you do otherwise. And you take risks, and you're responsible for making things work. And in order to do that, you have to dig deep in yourself, and you have to really confront your own weaknesses and address them. And I think that is another thing that is very fulfilling about entrepreneurship, is that in a way it is a kind of personal development program too. If you address entrepreneurship and you're willing to face the challenges and the embarrassments and the personal growth that goes with it, then you come out a better person too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems like self-leadership is a very important part of personal development and probably of self-esteem as well. And I always considered that it's a pretty big obstacle to developing self-leadership if you are being led 40 to however many hours a week. That's an issue on that front.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it is that the thing that really, what I learned most was through entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is so much about selling and about trying to persuade other people to take interest in your business, to take interest in your product, to be enthusiastic about what you're doing. You have to do that every day. You have to sell. And in order to do that effectively, you actually have to take a much greater interest in people, including yourself, but also what other people want, what other people need. My interest in psychology started with entrepreneurship. It started because I wanted to understand what the people working for me really wanted, what motivated them. And it was through that process that I had to really confront the fact that the things that I find interesting and motivating are not the same things as what a lot of other people find interesting and motivating. So I had to try harder to actually empathize with other people, understand what they wanted, and see how I could find an opportunity for example, for the people who work for me to feel fulfilled in what they're doing and still to be pushing the business forward, and for the people we wanted to sell to find value in what we were doing. So I think it's an opportunity to really understand more about other people and about psychology and about relationships, because it is so entrepreneurship is so relationship focused.
Yeah, I noticed in your recommended reading, A Drive by Pink. I don't remember his first name.
Yes, Dan.
Was
Pink.
that? Yeah. Oh, yes. Was that the beginning of your journey?
Not really. I found that one relatively late on. I started off with a lot of it depends on which journey you're talking about. Do you mean in terms of interest in psychology and relationships?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually my interest started with some of the typical tools that people use for motivational stuff within businesses. And for example, I took interest in personality testing tools like the Myers-Briggs test as a way of trying to find, okay, so what is it that motivates people working here, and what's the differences between the kind of roles and tasks that would better suit some people than others? And those tools are very crude. I mean, they're models, so they're always a simplification of things, but they were an opportunity for me to start thinking about motivation and about personality differences and about accepting that people are motivated by different things and that there are different ways that people prefer working. And that was just sort of the beginning. But having started with those kind of very simple tools, I started thinking more about fulfillment in general and, what other useful concepts there are out there for how people find fulfillment. And I found Drive to be a really, really useful way of distilling this idea of intrinsic fulfillment. That there's a difference between the kind of fulfillment that you get from yourself, from the process of living your values and living the way that you want to live, as opposed to fulfillment that comes from other people, congratulating you or something like that. And Drive is a great book for sort of identifying those intrinsic motivations that you really need as an entrepreneur, because you have to be the source of so much enthusiasm. You have to be the source of so much drive for the business itself that you've got to find that from within. So I found that book relatively late in my interest in psychology, but it just really distilled that concept of intrinsic motivation very well for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a bit of a side note to personal development in a way, and in others not, but I have read that book when I was studying business management in university, and it's an absolutely fascinating book. I'm curious, how many employees did you have?
Well, it varied during the growth of the business, but it ended up being about 24.
How did you implement the idea? Did you implement the ideas in that book in your company, and how did that go? Because there are not a lot of companies, as far as I can see, that have really embraced that. So that's something that's very interesting. Well,
I can't remember exactly when I read Drive, but I think it was relatively late in the development of my business. So I didn't really design my working relationships around those ideas of intrinsic motivation. Some of the things that I did learn about psychology and working with people were partly that it's just so hard to tell in advance how well people are going to work together and what exactly people are going to be like. Interviewing people is one of those things where you can't tell that much from an interview about how well people are going to get on with each other and what's really going to motivate someone. And one of the things that we found was that we had an internship program within my business, And we basically trained people in using the software the kind of tools that we were using. And that was an opportunity for them to come and learn some new skills, but also contribute to projects and work with other people. And one of the things that I really found was that kind of experience-based learning about people is so much more valuable than interview techniques or personality tests or anything like that. Because a lot of the time, that's where you really see how people are going to get on and how motivated people are. And so I found that was one of the things that worked really well in terms of employing people, was actually just working together on projects as much as possible. And through things like our internship program was a way to actually see how people would get on and what people are like.
Yeah, that's so cool, because I remember reading a study not so long ago that basically looked at factors predicting job performance, and on the job, like internships or kind of trial work periods were one of the best predictors. And actually, if I remember correctly, IQ was the best, phoning up references and kind of internships were the second and the third. I don't remember the order, and they were major chunks of job performance. And most of the things that are done in companies today, such as looking at the CV, doing the interview, looking at the education, were really fractional overall. So that's interesting. That kind of backs that up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I definitely experienced was that motivation and willingness to learn and attitude counts for so much. I mean, obviously, it's great to have very intelligent people, and you need very intelligent people, especially in highly specialist roles. But the interesting thing is that if you have someone who's really intelligent but has a really bad attitude, it just doesn't work. So your approach to work and your sense of motivation, your sense of purpose counts for so much. And that's my experience both as an employer and also, in my own experience in terms of what worked for me in business, that it's because I was interested in what I was doing that I had, the stamina to keep going when things were really difficult with the business. And it's the same if you want to get a good job, your attitude just counts for so much.
Yeah, and an interesting chapter in your book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, is the one on finding the beauty and the purpose of things or goals or mission statements that are not so grandiose, that are not necessarily changing the world. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I basically wanted to write in that book about how important it was for me to find a sense of purpose in what we were doing, because it was very important to me that my business was doing something that I believed in, that we were contributing to improving the environment for pedestrians, for people on foot, and to creating better spaces and better environments for people to live and work and enjoy and relax in. And, I found that very fulfilling, that my business was involved in something that was meaningful to me. And I think everyone who starts a business needs to find fulfillment in what it is that their business is doing. But the important thing is it doesn't have to be this earth-shattering, cure for cancer in order for you to find meaning and fulfillment in what you're doing, because everyone who contributes to providing a business which is serving customers is improving the lives of those customers. Even if it seems to be in relatively simple ways, you're still contributing to improving the lives of the people that you serve. And by doing so, you make the division of labor itself bigger and richer. And in doing so, you help improve the lives of everyone. So I think it's really important to see your business within that bigger picture and get a sense of the purpose as your motivation for what you're doing, because when you do that, it gives you the strength to get through the hard times.
Yeah, and I found that a very powerful idea, because myself, I have this podcast and I'm thinking about all sorts of entrepreneurial avenues. But when I was reading the book, and that was a while ago, that really hit me, because I had this issue where I had a number of opportunities open to me, but they all seemed kind of pedestrian. That's a good one.
Yeah.
They all seemed kind of boring, kind of uninspiring, and I really longed to do something that has a really deep impact. But then I read your chapter, and that really opened my eye in being able to find the beauty in many different things.
Yeah.
And you also talk about ethics in that chapter, how that influences it.
Yeah. Just on that first point of what you said, I think it's really important that you do find purpose yourself rather than what other people think is worthy. You know, because a lot of people get stuck in this thing where they think that they don't really question whether or not it's worthy for them to be doing an employee job where they're just earning money every day, because they just consider that to be part of life. But they think, oh, well, I'm not going to leave this job to start my own business unless I'm doing something that, you know, is going to really wow everyone with being this earth-shattering, life-changing, you know, humanity progressing role that I would have. And the key thing about it is it's up to you to find the meaning in what you're doing, and it's up to you to find the beauty in the way that you put it there, not for other people to tell you whether or not it's important that you are creating, you know, a much friendlier pizza delivery service in your area or whatever it is, right? It's to other people to tell you whether or not that helps humanity. It's up to you to find the meaning in it itself. And even if you start off with something that you think is, you know, not where you want to ultimately be, you can use that experience to learn about helping people, serving customers, understanding people better, having systems, identifying ways of being conscious of what you're doing in a business. And you can use it as a stepping stone to the future. But it's your job, I think, as an entrepreneur to really be enthusiastic about the purpose of your business, because otherwise, why should anyone else be? You know, and that's, I think, the key is that once you're enthusiastic about it, if you think that there's meaning in creating a stationery company, then you can express that and you can explain to people why it is that your stationery company, you know, is going to help people connect. It's going to, you know, bring more love into their lives, or whatever it is that you find meaning in it, rather than just, you know, oh, I've started a stationery company. I don't know if it's really very important. You know what I mean? It's actually your job to do that. And I think the other thing that you mentioned was the ethics aspect, and there's a lot to say about it, but the basic point that I wanted to make in this book again and again is that entrepreneurship gets such a bad press so often, and people have a suspicion of business in general and think that business is about ripping people off. And the important thing to me is that being an entrepreneur is actually a way of expressing and living your ethics and living your values. You can choose to be principled, and you can demonstrate through your actions that you're principled. And in fact, given that entrepreneurship is all about finding voluntary customers, it is an absolutely ethical way to live. And it can be a really ethical opportunity to help improve the lives of others, all through voluntary action.
Yeah, and if you're thinking through a win-win perspective, it suddenly becomes a very, very noble endeavor. But yeah, there's this view plaguing society about businesses abusing their customers and tricking them into buying things. And there are certainly businesses that do it, but I don't think that's the majority. And there's a choice there on the part of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, and the analogy that I use in the book is that, you know, there are people who write books about dating that are manipulative, like, you know, how to get someone to sleep with you by, you know, using psychological manipulation. Sure, there are people who think like that, but that doesn't mean that dating itself is in any way immoral or manipulative. You know, dating is just dating, and there are some people who take that approach to it, but that doesn't actually reflect on the process of dating per se. You know, and it's the same with entrepreneurship. Sure, there are some people who are unprincipled entrepreneurs, and, you know, to a certain extent, the market is actually very good at weeding them out, because you're not going to be successful in business if you're trading on a market if you keep ripping people off, because people won't come back. back and you need repeat sales. But even though there are some people who are unprincipled who go into business, that doesn't actually reflect on business and the process of selling itself. It's perfectly possible to be a principled salesperson and to be a principled entrepreneur.
Right. I love how you're transitioning into all of the topics that I want to talk about. But before I go there, I want to say that for people who are skeptical of entrepreneurship, they probably could use a healthy dose of the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Maybe that will change their minds. Although it's a big dose. So selling. A lot of people are very reluctant to sell, and I was very reluctant to sell myself. If I remember correctly, you were too.
Yeah, definitely.
So why is that, and how can it be overcome?
Well, I think from my own experience, I was reluctant to sell because there's an opportunity of rejection and failure, and people are afraid of that. At least I was, and I'm pretty sure that's what most people find uncomfortable about selling. Selling is, you're going to hear people say no a lot, and you're going to hear people actually, even more than just saying no, you can hear a lot of people who are just not going to be interested in what it is that you're trying to get them interested in. And so it is a psychologically challenging thing to do, because you have to try and persuade people, and you have to be willing for them to be not persuaded and not interested, and learn from that. And there's embarrassment in that, and it's difficult. So that's why I think people want to avoid it, because it's psychologically hard to not take things personally and to not think about things as being a reflection on you and your character, but rather to try and actually get outside, your preoccupation with yourself and think about things more objectively. Okay, well, why doesn't this person want this product that I'm selling? What is it that they really need? What haven't I understood about what they're trying to achieve in their own life, and about what they would need in order to succeed? And what can I do to provide that for them? In order to be successful in that way, you have to really get out of your own preoccupation with yourself. So it's an enormous chance for personal growth, but it's also deeply uncomfortable. And selling immediately exposes all of our personal failings. It's an really interesting psychological experience in that way, that if you find it difficult to be nice to other people and to be empathetic and to understand them and to be helpful, selling will immediately expose that, and it will force you to actually become a more interested, curious, compassionate, empathetic, and also it will force you to become a stronger person too, because in order to sell, it's not just about being empathetic. You actually have to have a lot of strength and self-belief, and as I said, not take things personally, in order to hear what people are saying and process the information without it becoming, all about you. And so I think it's a really powerful learning process, but it's psychologically hard, and that's ultimately why people don't like doing it.
How do you solve the psychological side of that? I'm guessing part of it is just getting used to it, but is there more there?
Well, I mean, I think it's a long and complicated process, but ultimately the thing that really strikes me is whether or not you are willing to go through that process. It's like learning a foreign language. If you want to learn a foreign language, you will go through a period where it is embarrassing, where you're trying to say things and you kind of say something that vaguely resembles what you meant, but isn't really, you can have, when I first learnt German, I was living in Berlin at the time, and I would listen to conversations where I would understand 5% of what was being said. And a lot of the time I just sort of sat there with a blank look on my face, listening to people, trying to find an opportunity to take part in the conversation. And then when I did see an opportunity and finally had understood what people were talking about, they'd already moved on, long past. But I was so interested in learning German that I was willing to sit through conversations where I only understood 5%, so I could get to 6% and then 7% and 8% and so on and so forth. And that's, I think that willingness with selling is also the really important thing. Selling started to work for me when I took interest in it as an activity, and when I started to actually think of this not just as a duty that I had to